Alleged victims, videos, photos, texts, emails, 4 weeks into testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs sex crimes trial. Who's winning? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So I kind of wanted to do this midway assessment of where are we in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial. There has been a lot that has been going on. This is the man accused, by the way, of engaging in racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation, to engage in prostitution, 5 charges, that he allegedly engaged in a pattern of abuse and sexual exploitation of women, that he used his business resources and employees and associates to commit crimes, cover them up, that he operated this criminal enterprise, that he used force, fraud, coercion to cause at least 2 women, Cassie Ventura Fine and Jane, pseudonym, to engage in non-consensual freak-offs, sex workers being used for prostitution, a video of him appearing to beat up Cassie, the testimony of Kid Cudi supporting the allegation that Combs blew up his car, arson, a hotel worker claiming Combs paid $100,000 for surveillance footage of an apparent attack on Cassie, bribery. These are all underlying crimes for racketeering. One woman testifying that Combs dangled her off a 17th-story balcony. Another woman claiming Combs kidnapped her with a gun. But defense attorneys grilling these alleged victims and witnesses about inconsistent statements, financial motivations, and maybe most importantly, messages and social media posts that allegedly show them trying to stay in touch with Sean Combs, or speaking highly of him, or showing their willing participation in sexual activities. The idea they could have left, but didn't. So there is a lot here. So I ask, who is winning right now as we are at the midway point in this trial? I'm not going to answer that question alone. You don't just want to hear from me for 25 minutes. No, let me bring on trial attorney, litigator, best socks in the business, Rich Schoenstein. Good to see you, Rich. Thank you so much. And for people who don't know, you just got off the live show with me that we do on YouTube and been so generous to come here on Sidebar, so appreciate it.
Well, I'm always glad to be here. Very interesting case to talk about.
So with the caveat that we have no idea what the jury is thinking, with the caveat that the defense hasn't even begun their case yet, who's winning this?
Well, the prosecution is winning. And you would hope that the prosecution would be winning. We're deep into the government's case right now. They've put on their most important witness. They almost virtually led off with their most important witness. And they've shown really 2 things, if I would break it down. One is they have demonstrated really beyond dispute that he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. He beats up his longtime girlfriend, he beats up other people, he blows up cars, he dangles people off the balcony, he operates through threats and intimidation and bribery. He is a bad guy. I don't think you can dispute that. I think the defense virtually concedes that in the opening statement. I mean, they do concede that he's done bad things, but he's done too many bad things. He is a bad guy. And the second thing is, I think the government has shown enough evidence of the various elements of the various crimes charged that they can proceed on all of those claims to a jury. Remember, a judge will hear directed verdict motions at the end of the government's case, and if there's not sufficient evidence, you don't get a cause of action, you don't get a claim to the jury. I think everything will go to the jury.
Meaning the defense at the end of the prosecution's case can be like, after everything you heard, Judge, there's nothing for the jury to decide. This case should be dismissed. That's not going to happen.
Well, yeah.
There's enough there for the jury to decide. There's questions of fact.
Right. And it's a little more complicated here. I mean, that happens all the time in criminal prosecutions, and those motions are always denied. There are very technical elements of this RICO count.
Right.
You have to prove a RICO enterprise, you have to prove conspiracy, you have to prove predicate acts. I think the government's done that. I don't think any of that's going to block it from going to the jury.
Let's talk about that. That's what I want to talk about, if they've met those elements. Hey, everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to all this? Yeah, well, Morgan & Morgan, they're stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, then visit www.forthepeople.com/food or scan the QR code on screen to learn more. From a human point of view, we had Barrett Berger on the live show, and she said, look, when you're confronted with this evidence, the jurors are human beings. I'm a bit paraphrasing, but the jurors are human beings. What they're supposed to do is make a decision based on the facts and the evidence and what's presented in court. What they're not supposed to do is just make an assessment, he's a bad guy, I want to convict him of something. But she said her experience would tend to show that when jurors are confronted with a bad guy who's done bad things, how on earth can they let him off?
Yeah.
So there is something to that. And I think that is a legitimate concern. I think when the 2016 video came into evidence, that was the main concern, right? Before we even get into the elements, that's a problem.
That's a huge problem because the argument that the defense has, well, he's a bad guy, but you didn't charge the right crimes. You know, if you're a defense team picking arguments you're going to make at trial, that's not even in the top 10 arguments that you want to make, but that's what they've been left with. They're running with it, and they have to. When you try cases, you take the case you're handed. You don't get to make it up from scratch. So
right.
That's what's available to them. But it's not. It's a hard argument to make.
Okay, so let's talk racketeering conspiracy and whether or not at this point in the trial we don't know who else is going to be called. But let's talk racketeering conspiracy. Do you think that they have proven there is a criminal enterprise, and how have they proven it? And explain what we mean by that.
Sure. A criminal enterprise can be any sort of assemblage. And typically when we first heard of RICO, it was in the context of the mob. And the thing that's different about that kind of case from this kind of case is in a mob case, the organization itself is created to commit illegal acts. This case has legitimate businesses. He's an entertainer. He's a businessman. Millions and millions of dollars of legit business. So it's not an organization created to commit illegal acts, but his businesses are shown to be linked to all of this activity. His businesses help buy the videotape. His businesses help try to cover up his illegal activity. His businesses help fund his illegal activity. So the enterprise at the end of the day are his businesses.
And if it's an association of people, even if it wasn't businesses, and they say that, he uses his businesses and resources, but associates and employees and staff to facilitate crimes and cover them up. I think, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. When David James, his assistant, said when he started work, he was told, this is Sean Combs' kingdom, we're all here to serve it. For a criminal enterprise, you have to have a common purpose.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what it is. If it was the mafia, we're all helping the family, right? We're all helping the family. If the goal is to help Sean Combs, protect his image, protect him at all costs, George Kaplan, another assistant, basically testified the same thing. I can kind of see that, right? I can kind of see, not everybody can be charged with racketeering. John Smith on the street can't. But if you're Sean Combs, who has all these employees, I can kind of see it. The idea of there being a common agreement, like there was a conspiracy, there's a criminal agreement to further criminal activity. Have you seen that? Have you seen an agreement, an understanding, an association of all these people? They're all on the same page?
Well, they're roughly on the same page. I mean, I would go at this if I was on the defense team too, because obviously there's no express agreement, there's no contract, there's no conversation, there's no clear agreement where a group of people sat down and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to cover up domestic violence, right? But there's an understanding amongst the people who work for his businesses that they are there to service and protect the king. He is the king. He is the head of all the businesses. He is the reason all of them make money, and they need to do his bidding.
Can I push back on that? Because
Sure.
Derek Ferguson, who was the head of his finances, right, the CFO, testified. And you would think if I were to tell you in a racketeering case, oh man, he's going to say how the profits from all of this illegal conduct flowed through. He was asked, like, what do you think about Sean Combs being charged with these crimes? And he really didn't have an answer. And he was asked under cross-examination, have you seen evidence of criminal activity? No. Have you seen that this sexual abuse and sexual exploitation or sex trafficking has benefited Sean Combs' businesses? He says, I can't. What I did find interesting is he talked about how there were opportunities for Sean Combs to have personal accounts, that he supplied his staff with cash, maybe important for the freak-offs, things like that. And of course, there was, I think the biggest part of the testimony is there was a $20,000 payment that seemed to confirm the allegation from Cassandra Ventura's mom that her family had paid $20,000 to prevent Sean Combs from releasing sex tapes of their daughter. But you didn't see that flow of money so concretely where the jury might say, I don't know. How exactly is this benefiting his businesses or him?
Well, okay, so contrast it again to a mob case. This is not a criminal organization selling drugs and deriving profits, or selling guns or prostitution and deriving profits, and that obviously benefits the organization. It's not the domestic violence that benefits the organization. It's the covering up of the domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
It is the carrots and the sticks that make those victims keep quiet, remain anonymous.
You mean protecting him so
Yes.
everybody benefits?
Right. Right. And
Okay.
so that doesn't equate to revenue, but it protects the whole enterprise and allows the enterprise to continue to generate profits.
So I also think they've done a good job at establishing the methods and the means and the pattern, right? There's just been so much testimony about alleged, physical violence that he inflicted, not just on Cassie, but other people. You know, there was the testimony of Mia, there was the testimony of Breonna Bogolan, there was the testimony of Capricorn Clark, and we'll get into this a little bit later with forced labor, but I just feel like they've done that. Now the question becomes, have they proven at least 2 underlying predicate crimes for racketeering? And so we have forced labor, we have kidnapping, we have sex trafficking, we have arson, we have bribery of a witness, obstruction. There are drug offenses, right? Possession with intent to distribute of narcotics and controlled substances. Have they proven at this point in time at least 2?
Sure. I mean, there's the bribery, there's buying the videotape, right? There's buying the video from the
From
hotel.
Eddie Garcia.
Yeah. And what was significant about that to me, and I wasn't expecting, is Sean Combs has the money. Sean Combs delivers the money. He is the bag man, which you don't expect. He's running the whole operation. I don't know why he's carrying around a bag of $100,000, but according to the testimony, which I think is believable, he did that himself. He delivered that himself, so he has no excuse. There's no CEO defense.
No middleman.
Right. I didn't know what my
No buffer.
minions were doing. They were trying to protect me. I didn't know about it. He is actually there. He's there at the guy's house while the guy's car is being blown up. I think
Kid Cudi.
Yeah. I think that may be a little bit harder, but I think there's bribery. I think there's arson. And I mean, there's obviously trafficking of prostitution. There's prostitutes being brought to these freak-offs, and he's involved in that.
So let's break this down a little bit. I agree. I think with Eddie Garcia, I think the jury has a clear, digestible count for bribery as one of the underlying crimes, because this is a guy who was granted immunity, who clearly needed it, because he basically said that he took $100,000 that he split with 2 other people, didn't report the money on his taxes, didn't put in his bank account, admitted to lying to authorities in June of 2024. Now, the defense would say, hey, the NDA that you signed didn't prevent you from speaking to law enforcement. This was just purely to protect Sean Combs' privacy, the privacy of Cassandra Ventura. This was not to cover up a crime, although Eddie Garcia testified that Sean Combs told him don't make any big purchases. A little strange, but there's that. And by the way, going back to bribery, there was another security guard who also said that Sean Combs tried to bribe him as well. He said he pushed Combs against the wall, refused the payment. Put bribery to the side. Now you got kidnapping, arson. I think Kid Cudi was one of the most important witnesses. So Kid Cudi testified, right, that he had this beef with Sean Combs because he started dating Cassie. Says his car was blown up with a Molotov cocktail. There was corroborating evidence from law enforcement and about an investigation into this. Also said that he was told Sean Combs' assistant Capricorn Clark was basically kidnapped, taken to his house. I think he helped prove 2 underlying crimes, and Capricorn Clark's testimony supported the kidnapping. Maybe it's not clearly articulated or digestible as the bribery. And by the way, Kid Cudi said that while Combs denied it at first, it was like years later, he says he came to him and basically said, I'm sorry for all that. It was specific, but he felt like a credible witness, no?
Yes, he did seem like a credible witness. And the reason I differentiated a little bit from the bribery is, again, because the bribery is money in Sean Combs' hands. We don't know who threw presumably a Molotov cocktail into this guy's car, right? The jury has to, do they see proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Combs gave the instruction for that to happen? Looks highly probable given the circumstances and given the testimony, but they have to find beyond a reasonable doubt that there are multiple predicate acts. So can they get there on arson? Can they get there on kidnapping? And again, I think the undercurrent of how bad a guy he is going to influence the jury in that regard.
What about the assistants? You know, you talk about assistants cleaning up the hotel rooms, which if the jury accepts freak-offs were coerced sexual encounters with commercial sex workers, that they're crime scenes essentially, and they're setting them up, cleaning them up, that they were getting Combs drugs, which may or may not have been used to keep victims compliant, which is one of the allegations. One assistant talked about driving Combs to confront Suge Knight, who was his rival, that Combs was carrying guns, that they were watching the abuse of Cassie. One testified about having to buy some materials to maybe stop her swelling, maybe cover up. Do you think that they have established that if a racketeering conspiracy, Combs used his staff, his employees, his associates to commit crimes and cover them up? You think they've proven that?
Yes.
Okay.
I totally do. I think it's pretty clear that the staff was there, again, to service and protect the king, and that they're literally cleaning up crime scenes. I do think that's established.
What about forced labor? That's another underlying predicate crime for kidnapping. And if you want, I can lay out what I think might be it.
Yeah, you tell me what the forced labor is.
So you had testimony from assistants that they were working like essentially 24 hours, 7 days a week, that they were up 5 days straight. You had one assistant, Mia, who said that she was basically sexually assaulted. You had another who said they were blackmailed with tape of them dancing, I think, on a narcotic of some kind. So, you know, that's hanging over them as they're doing the work of Sean Combs. You have another who says that they were basically subjected to a lie detector test for days. One says they were threatened. Capricorn Clark, she also says that she was kidnapped. And you think about this environment that they're in, is this forced labor?
Yeah, I think you can probably get there from the totality of the circumstances. Some of this stuff is, and I've been in other cases where people complain about how hard it is to work for a celebrity, and there's a lot of whining about the hours are really bad, and the celebrities call you night and day, and they need things urgently. And that's just par for the course if you're going to be an assistant for somebody with that kind of lifestyle. But when you get to threats and videotapes and threats to turn them over to the police, now you're well outside what could reasonably be expected. And I guess that could get you to forced labor.
Okay, so I don't know if there's more that you want to add for racketeering conspiracy, but I think we nailed it, that they definitely have enough to survive like a motion to dismiss, right? To move it forward, motion for directed verdict, to go to the jury. We don't know what the jury will say, but you think that, I said they're probably 75% there, 80% there. I think there still needs to articulate a little bit more the flow of money and a little bit more the agreement, the understanding, the conspiracy. I mean, do you think that we have heard the testimony from co-conspirators? People have taken immunity deals, but you can't have a racketeering conspiracy and a legal agreement with himself. Do you think we've heard from the co-conspirators?
No, I think you could. I think the government could add a little conspiracy testimony, and also flow of money is very important in this kind of thing, so that could be helpful.
You think you need Christina Coram, the former chief of staff who's come up a lot during the course of this case?
I don't know if you need her, but I think it's optimal to have her.
Okay, so racketeering conspiracy, top charge, potentially life in prison, put that to the side. Let's go to the lowest hanging fruit, and then we'll get to sex trafficking. Transportation to engage in prostitution. Essentially, that Sean Combs transported sex workers and victims with the intent that they engage in sex work, that they're the intent of prostitution. You don't need force, fraud, or coercion for sex trafficking. It's more of a straightforward charge, carries up to 10 years in prison. Have they proven that? Take Cassie's testimony. She claims that freak-offs happened in multiple locations, multiple cities. So if the jury accepts all these episodes were sex work, right? She's having sex or sexual relations with people who are being paid sex work. She also testified that the male performer, the escort, who was allegedly in the room at the LA Intercontinental Hotel in 2016 was named Jules. And Jules was used in multiple locations. That, to me, could be transportation.
And paid.
And paid.
And paid. Yeah. I think that is. You have a little bit of a risk if you're the prosecution that the jury is going to conclude that these were all willing participants and this wasn't really prostitution, this was a sex party. I think as a technical matter, if you pay a prostitute to come to another state and have sex with people, that is sex trafficking. That is exactly what that is.
And if he had Cassie do the payments and arrange it, could he still be found guilty?
Sure. It's his money. He is a participant in it. He knows it's happening. I don't think he can get out of it. Just because he's not the bag man on that one, I don't think he gets out of it.
So now we got 2 charges down. Let's talk about sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. So, in order to prove that, the government would have to show that force, fraud, coercion was used for her to be induced into engaging into these non-consensual episodes, these freak-offs with commercial sex workers. Maybe even, if you want to say whether they're paid or not, something of opportunity was dangled over her head, whether or not she was given something to engage in sex, talk about financial control, things of that nature. Has the government proven sex trafficking, which, by the way, has a mandatory minimum of 15 years in prison? Have they proven it?
So my view is yes, but I do understand where there could be a difference of opinion here, because it's a question of fact. Was she compelled to engage in the activity she engaged in? There's no question that she engaged in the activity, right? So the question is that because she wanted to, or is that because of punishments and inducements to do it? And to me, this seems like domestic violence and a situation where the victim is subject to a lot of influence, and a classic situation where you have one party in the relationship who has much more power, infinitely more power than the other person. And he is exerting that power to make her do what he wants. And the fact that she sometimes likes it, which is clearly true, right, from the evidence. I mean, it does
text messages. Things
it
like
does
that,
appear that she at times is a willing participant, but overall, I still find it to meet the definition of sex trafficking.
Because the jury could accept there's no way she actually consented to this when you think about what she claimed happened to her. And you think about, I mean, the prosecution has been so keen at trying to establish what the environment was. You know, even talking about Brianna Bengolan allegedly being hanged off a 17-story balcony, the prosecution came out today and said, well, if Cassie was aware of it, it goes to coercion. It shows like the violence she was around and what would have happened. I said this before, I said again, this is not a clean prosecution.
Correct.
And I want to get to where the defense is going in a minute, because I think they've been doing a stellar job. I really do. But I think there are 2 concrete examples for sex trafficking for Cassie Ventura, and I'm curious your thoughts. So number 1, 2016 hotel. So the idea is she claims she was leaving a freak-off, so a commercial sex event, right? Leaving a freak-off, when Sean Combs, in a towel, by the way, runs down the hall, hits her, drags her back in the direction of the room, and that's a clear-cut case of violence, clear-cut case of force being used. Number 2 is she claims she was on a plane, so now you have a travel component as well. He sits next to her, shows her videos of freak-offs as a way to intimidate her, threatens to release them. She says she feels trapped. They land. Shortly thereafter, he asks for a freak-off. He gets a freak-off. So you have a travel component, you have a coercion component, and you have a commercial sex act component. I think those 2 are the most clear-cut cases of sex trafficking in this case.
I agree they're pretty clear cut, but I wonder if the jury is going to consider it on a case-by-case, incident-by-incident basis, or if the jury is just going to say, what do we think of this relationship? Do we think she was a victim, or do we think she was a willing participant? And one of the things the jury could look at, a jury would easily understand that she didn't have a way out. She's with this very powerful man, he makes threats, there's financial inducements to stay in the relationship, there's problems if she gets out, but the difficulty with that is she did get out. The difficulty with that is at the end of the day, as the jury has seen, she got out. She got a new partner, she's had children, she started a lawsuit, she's getting paid a lot of dough for the lawsuit. So a jury could question the narrative that she couldn't get out.
So in other words, it's not like she, hit her attacker on the head, ran to police, finally escaped. Because the thing is even after the 2016 episode, there was a text message where she basically wrote him, it wasn't good vibes or not a good vibe. I mean, it seems light. And it goes to a larger conversation. Look, you had Dr. Dawn Hughes who took the stand. This forensic psychologist said when you look at victim abuse relationships, basically, it may look like a victim is acting inconsistent with being abused, but that's not the case. There's trauma bonding, there's financial control, there's a realization if you're ultimately a victim. There's a lot of complicated factors about why they stay in touch. Cassie testified that she was raped by Sean Combs and then had one more consensual encounter. And I think our understanding has changed. But at the same time, and this goes to a larger question, if this really did happen, are these people, particularly Cassie, is she a victim of domestic violence or is she a victim of sex trafficking? The text messages where she seemed to encourage the freak-offs or set them up, was it a way just to appease this tormentor, or was it, I'm in a relationship? Brianna Bengolan, first of all, the defense said, you stayed in touch with Cassie, you maintained that relationship after you getting attacked like this? That seems weird, but 2 weeks after this purported attack, you asked Cassie if Sean Combs wants a sweatshirt? Mia, the woman who claims that she was sexually assaulted multiple times by Sean Combs, had these glowing text messages to him. I love you. Birthday messages to him. There was messages about people who were allegedly tormented by Sean Combs but wanted to continue working for him. There's a question of could they not get a job? Were they blackballed in the industry? Inconsistencies in their testimony. They raised things during their testimony that they didn't first explain to prosecutors. I say it's not a clean case. I wonder how much the jury will struggle with the testimony because the defense has done a fantastic job at striking the credibility or trying to strike the credibility of these key witnesses.
The defense has done a good job. I think they've had very balanced cross-examinations. They haven't gone after anybody too hard, which I credit the defense for, because you have to be careful when you're examining people who are allegedly victims of this kind of violence. And I think Cassie is both a victim and a perpetrator. I think she is both a victim and a co-conspirator because
in what?
She's arranging prostitutes across state lines. She's involved in prostitution. She's involved in trafficking. She's doing that. She's part of the organization that protects Diddy. She is.
But she didn't take an immunity deal. And if she's not a victim in it, but yeah.
But she's not, well, she didn't take an immunity deal, but she knows she's not being prosecuted.
Do you think the jury will look at her as that?
No, I think the jury will mostly look at her as a victim. I think she mostly is a victim. I think, again, he had the power. There's physical violence. There's threats. There's all kinds of intimidation. I think she is mostly a victim. But your point was it's not clean, and you're 100% right. A lot of the other people in his organization can be both victims, themselves subject to threats, and co-conspirators.
Do you know what I think some of the most important testimony was? It was from Dawn Richard. So this former member of Danity Kane, she testified that she observed Sean Combs punching Cassie in front of high-profile celebrities. Yeah. So Neo, Usher, Jimmy Iovine. There has been testimony. I think there were like 2 witnesses, Mia and Deontay Nash, who basically said they intervened in an alleged attack on Cassie by Sean Combs. No one else did. So if you talk about the power dynamic, I think a fair argument will be from the prosecution, what did you expect her to do? What did you expect Cassie to do? If Sean Combs can do this with impunity, you expect her to stand up, you expect her to go to police. Look what happened to the 2016 tape.
Even in a more ordinary domestic abuse case, we understand that the victims have difficulty leaving those situations. We understand that the victims may still have affection for the perpetrator, may be confused, may stay in those relationships. And fortunately, we've advanced enough as a species that we recognize that just because they stayed in the relationship doesn't mean they were abused. That's what this case is, but like on steroids, because it's a big version of that.
Before we go, what does the defense need to do to shift everything? Who do they need to call as a witness? And I know there's a lot of talk about whether Diddy's going to take the stand or not. I don't think that's happening. But who do they need to call in their case to raise more reasonable doubt?
So I don't know how they're going to affirmatively raise reasonable doubt. I don't believe for a minute that Sean Combs will testify. I think that would be a huge mistake. He would be just brutalized on cross-examination. That would be terrible. I don't see it happening. I don't know that they have affirmative witnesses to disprove anything the government is saying. Their main defense has been cross-examination, sowing seeds of doubt, and their strategy, which I think is the correct strategy and is well done, of saying just because he's done some bad things doesn't mean he's guilty of these crimes. I don't know what other cards they have to play. I don't expect a very long defense case.
They might not feel they have to. So it's either striking at the credibility of the witnesses or saying, hey, guess what? Those elements, they were not met.
Well, not that they don't have to, but also that they can't.
Yeah,
what are they going to do? What are they going to do? They're going to put on some self-serving witness to be a character witness for him?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's not going to work. He gives to charities for small children, but he beats his girlfriend? I mean, that doesn't help.
And they already have, maybe there's already so many messages that they've been presenting in cross that help their case. So it will be interesting to see. I'm glad we had an opportunity to talk about this. I wanted to just kind of do a midway analysis. Rich Schoenstein, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, Jesse.
Good seeing you. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.